Hello, I'm Esther Gidui. It's Tuesday, June 13th. This is Africa 54. Congolese President Denis Sassou Nguesso says he believes that Africa cannot remain silent in the face of the conflict in Ukraine as African leaders prepare to meet in Kyiv and Moscow for mediation talks. Former U.S. President Donald Trump will be arraigned Tuesday afternoon in his home state of Florida on charges stemming from his alleged mishandling of classified national security documents after he left the White House in 2021. We'll have a live report from Miami. And the month of June this year marks the inaugural Uterine Cancer Awareness Month globally, a cancer that develops inside a woman's womb. We'll hear from a doctor about prevention, symptoms, and treatment. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. We begin our broadcast in South Africa, where President Cyril Ramaphosa in May announced an upcoming visit by African leaders to Russia and Ukraine in a bid to end hostilities. The peace plan is also backed by the leaders of Senegal, Uganda, Egypt, the Republic of the Congo, and Zambia. Congolese President Denis Sassou Nguesso says he believes that Africa cannot remain silent in the face of the conflict in Ukraine, just a few days before African leaders are set to meet in Kyiv and Moscow to mediate.
We're all suffering, and the effects of these wars directly on our peoples. Inflation is rising everywhere, and we believe that Africa cannot remain silent or indifferent in the face of such a tragedy. It was agreed that a few heads of state, in fact, one head of state per Central African sub-region, plus the current president of the African Union, and that 5 or 6 heads of state could travel to Ukraine and Russia to bring a message of peace, or at least appeasement.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made a major push to quote the Global South, a term used for the regions of Latin America, Africa and Asia, last month in response to peace moves from some of its members. A group of U.S. lawmakers is calling for a U.S.-Africa trade summit planned for later this year to be moved from South Africa in response to what they said was the country's deepening military relationship with Russia. In a letter to U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and other senior officials, lawmakers also suggested South Africa is in danger of losing its benefits under the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, Washington's flagship trade program. For more reaction to this move, I'm joined live via Skype from Johannesburg, South Africa by Marisa Lorenzo, a South African political analyst. Marisa, welcome to Africa 54.
Hi, Esther. Thanks very much for having me on the show today.
Now, has South Africa reacted to the call by U.S. lawmakers?
Yes, so several hours ago, shortly after the letter came out, the Department of International Relations and Cooperation released a statement saying that there was nothing wrong with the relations and that the summit is expected to go ahead. There had been no formal call by the U.S. to withdraw it, and it just re-emphasized the ties between the two countries. It was a very short response, but really, I think, an attempt just to get the matter underhand.
Now, what would be possible economic and diplomatic implications of moving this trade summit from South Africa to another country?
I think the economic ramifications would actually be quite deep because South Africa really does benefit from its position as the most advanced economy in Africa, and that really makes it the gateway to the rest of sub-Saharan Africa. To move it somewhere else, I think would effectively signal that perhaps South Africa is losing its influence within the wider sub-Saharan Africa region. I think there would also be very large currency implications. We have seen that markets can react quite strongly to allegations of South Africa having deepening military ties to Russia. This would result in the rand weakening further, which of course makes South Africa's exports more competitive, but it does have other economic implications that are not so favorable. And then, of course, South Africa the US is one of South Africa's largest trading partners alongside China. So any kind of diplomatic fallout between the two, I think, would ruin South Africa's standing in the eyes of the EU, just more broadly in the West. So I think at the moment ties are okay, but if this kind of spat goes on, or if the US government decides to take action, and this is just a letter from lawmakers, it's nothing on the part of the US government itself. But if it does go on, there would be quite deep implications just because of how closely tied the two countries are and just because of how powerful the US is.
Yeah, well, that's well said there, because they've expressed that concern about the ties with Russia. But what options would South Africa have in this regard?
I think that the US is essentially trying to force South Africa not the US, pockets of the US, we can say, are trying to force South Africa to come out of its position of neutrality of the Russia-Ukraine matter. And I think that South Africa is just not really prepared to do that. And I don't think that it will be prepared to do that. It's got a lot of balancing to do. Like I said, the US is one of its largest trading partners, one of its most important, but it's also got the chairmanship of BRICS. And it also needs to manage the ties there between Russia and then between its other large trading partner, China. I think that another thing that is going to come up that South Africa is going to try balance is AGOA, which you mentioned at the beginning of this segment. Now, South Africa's preferential treatment under AGOA is set to be reconsidered in 2025 when that agreement expires. I don't see this being renewed for South Africa, but I don't think that the reason is going to be because of a diplomatic fallout or political. I think that South Africa's economy is just far too advanced for the terms and conditions under AGOA, and I think that is going to be taken into much larger consideration than it has been in the past. I think that South Africa's entry into AGOA was largely based a little bit on goodwill, effectively, but it does not need AGOA as much as its regional counterparts. But I think when that happens, it's going to be seen as a diplomatic fallout.
Marisa, thank you very much for your analysis. Marisa Lorenzo is a South African political analyst. Former U.S. President Donald Trump will be arraigned Tuesday afternoon in his home state of Florida on charges stemming from his alleged mishandling of classified national security documents after he left the White House in 2021. The arraignment will take place under heavy security in a federal courtroom in downtown Miami. Federal authorities have beefed up security around the court building, and Miami officials say they are prepared to prevent any violence from Trump supporters and counter-protesters.
Though we're preparing, we're bringing enough resources to handle crowd anywhere from 5,000 to 50,000. We don't expect any issues.
Trump's arraignment comes 5 days after a federal grand jury in Miami indicted him on 37 criminal counts, including 31 counts accusing him of willfully retaining classified national defense documents in violation of the Espionage Act.
Specifically, he had a judge, Aileen Cannon, who last year, in a fairly controversial ruling, authorized the appointment of an independent special master to review the hundreds of classified documents that were seized at Mar-a-Lago. This was an opinion that was very, very favorable to Trump. It went against the Justice Department's position. It was subsequently overruled by a federal appeals court. And one thing that's really notable and interesting is that Cannon is actually going to be the judge, at least at the moment, who's going to be overseeing the case against Donald Trump going forward. And that is unquestionably seems to be a fairly positive development for Trump.
Trump is the first former president to face a federal indictment. This is the second time in 2 months that he has been indicted. The former president faces separate state criminal charges in New York in connection with hush money payment to an adult film star during his 2016 presidential campaign. At Tuesday's hearing, Trump is expected to enter a plea of not guilty. The start date of his trial remains uncertain. Some experts speculate that it could take months to begin and might even be postponed until after the 2024 election. Trump aide Walt Nauta was also indicted in connection with obstructing government efforts to retrieve the documents. For more on Trump's indictment, I'm joined live from Miami, Florida by Associated Press reporter Philip Crowther. Philip, what's the scene around the courthouse like as former President Trump makes his way there? We hear a lot of noise in the background.
Yeah, it's a very hot and humid day as well here in Miami, and a lot of supporters of the former president have now arrived here. Now, directly behind me, you can see the cordoned off area by police just outside of the federal courthouse, the 13th floor of which is where Donald Trump will be making his first appearance in front of a judge in this case. Now, all around me, there are hundreds of members of national and international media, and there are, as I mentioned, more and more Donald Trump supporters here as well, mingling freely with us right now. There doesn't appear to be any separation here between media and protesters, and indeed no separation between Donald Trump supporters and the very few who have come here to, well, essentially celebrate the fact that Donald Trump is being indicted. We are seeing signs here that say things like "Trump is toast" or "lock him up," for example. We haven't seen any confrontations other than verbal ones so far between those two groups. Now, the number of Trump supporters here will undoubtedly increase. Why? Well, mainly because the former president himself had called on his supporters to come out en masse here and protest peacefully, he says, against this indictment and for what he says is his innocence.
And what happens now? What is expected when he enters the courtroom?
Well, look, first of all, you're not going to see any video, any audio, or any photos of what is going to happen in that courtroom. None of those media are allowed. There will be a few journalists there who will be able to tell us afterwards what exactly happened and what the former president's demeanor was, but essentially all you're going to be seeing is an artist's sketch of what the former president looked like in this courtroom. As to what exactly is going to happen, well, we expect it to last about an hour or so. The president will enter this courtroom and he will hear this indictment. He will hear all the charges and then gets his chance to, of course, plead not guilty, as we expect the former president to do so. Then there's still a little bit of time for logistics, the next steps in this case, though a trial date is unlikely to be set here today, and that is that here from Florida, except, of course, if Donald Trump wants to somehow mingle with the crowd here that has already assembled to show him their support. The latest we will hear from him will be at his club in New Jersey. He will be flying back to there, and that is where he will be holding a press conference later tonight.
Philip, a lot of people say he is not the first former federal official to have classified documents. Why is his case different?
Well, it is different, but it is worth mentioning two names: the former Vice President Mike Pence under Donald Trump, of course, but also the current President Joe Biden, both of which have had classified documents found in their offices or their private homes. And an investigation into the current president is still going on. An indictment there is unlikely, but still possible. In the case of the former Vice President, there won't be one. Now, the big difference, though, between those two cases and this one is that, according to the indictment, at least, Donald Trump knew exactly what he was doing. He was willfully holding on to these classified or secret documents, and then once the Department of Justice and investigators wanted to get all of those documents back, it seems like he conspired, at least according to this indictment, conspired to hold on to those documents and to essentially hide them from investigators. But all of this has led Donald Trump supporters to talk about a two-tier justice system in the United States, as well as other refrains that Donald Trump himself is also using to defend himself, saying that this is a case of political prosecution and of a witch hunt against him.
Philip, thanks for your excellent reporting. Philip Crowther, Associated Press reporter, live for us from Miami, Florida. On to Canada, where there are 450 active fires, with one new fire reported on Monday, according to firefighting officials. That's up from 417 fires tracked across the country on Friday. South Africa is deploying a second contingent of 200 firefighters and 13 managers this week to help fight a series of Canadian wildfires that have sparked a thick band of haze and smoke across northeastern United States, causing the worst air quality levels in decades. Trevor Abrahams, managing director at Working on Fire, is leading the South African firefighters team in Canada. He spoke to VOA's Carol Van Dam.
They've been there since Tuesday, being part of a larger team of Americans, Canadians, fighting these particular fires. Unfortunately, the weather went a bit bad in terms of fires, getting hotter, drier. And right now we've just had a little bit of rain, but then the wind has been picking up. So conditions are still quite hazardous.
That was Trevor Abrahams, Managing Director at Working on Fire and leader of the South African Firefighters team in Canada, speaking to VOA's Carol Van Dam. Let us know what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, awareness and prevention marking the inaugural Uterine Cancer Awareness Month globally. Stay with us.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Linor Moudou, in Washington every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
Turning to other news from Africa, John Frundi, a longtime opponent of autocratic Cameroonian President Paul Biya, has died at age 81 after a long illness. Ndi was the leader and founder of the Social Democratic Front, SDF, the main opposition party in parliament. Zimbabwean authorities charged 39 opposition activists with political violence over the alleged demolishing of a ruling party office and assaulting members of the Nyasime community as tensions grow ahead of national elections in August. The incident comes as rights groups and opposition parties have complained of a clampdown ahead of the vote. And the United Nations mission in Libya voiced concern over arbitrary arrest of migrants and asylum seekers in the country, accompanied by what it called a disturbing rise in hate speech and racist discourse. The UN mission said Libyan authorities had detained thousands of men, women, and children from the streets and their homes following raids on alleged traffickers' camps and warehouses. Tanzanian government is encouraging drivers to switch from using gasoline to power their cars to using compressed natural gas, CNG. This initiative aims to lower carbon emissions that cause global warming. Some drivers are hoping the switch will also help them save money in the long run. Charles Kombe reports from Dar es Salaam.
Jackson Peter, an Uber driver based in Dar es Salaam, recently switched from using gasoline to compressed natural gas, CNG, in his car. He says he did it for the environment and his wallet.
I noticed that fuel prices were rising, and I didn't know until when the prices would continue to rise. Also, using gas is less expensive and better for the environment compared to petrol and diesel.
It costs at least $1,000 to convert a car to compressed natural gas in Tanzania. It's a price many car users find more affordable, even though the government does not subsidize the charge. The Tanzanian government aims to power 8,000 cars with natural gas in Dar es Salaam alone. Officials say, so far, more than 2,000 vehicles have made the switch since the initiative began in 2018. At the conversion center located at the Dar es Salaam Institute of Technology, there's a steady stream of customers.
Kadri Watanzania wanavyopata elimu ya manufaa ya gesi asilia.
With increasing awareness and education about natural gas usage in Tanzania, the number of customers has grown rapidly from 1 to thousands. Projections indicate over 6,000 customers by 2024-2025, reflecting the positive response as more Tanzanians embrace the benefits of using natural gas in vehicles.
The Tanzanian government has embraced the 2015 Paris Agreement to limit global warming, mitigate the impacts of climate change, and build an environmentally sustainable future.
Until the year 2030, the aim of Tanzania is to make sure that the amount of hazardous gases emission is reduced by up to 30 to 35% according to the assessment that was conducted previously. We know that these gases come from various areas like the burning of forests, charcoal and cars. So with this trend of using natural gas in our country, we believe we will reduce the emission of these gases to that extent.
Besides encouraging cars to switch to CNG, the government has banned the use of firewood and charcoal by private and government institutions beginning in 2025. The government is also shifting investments to alternative energy sources, including solar energy, geothermal power, wind energy, and hydropower. Meanwhile, Jackson is confident his switch to CNG will pay off, anticipating significant profits while prioritizing environmental conservation. Charles Kombe for VOA News in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
It's time for Health segment, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu with a look at what we need to know about uterine cancer. Hello, Lino.
Hello, Esther. Indeed, we are looking at a uterine cancer, and it develops inside a woman's womb. June this year marks the inaugural Uterine Cancer Awareness Month globally. Data show that over 400,000 people were diagnosed with uterine cancer worldwide in 2020. According to the International Gynecologic Cancer Society, IGCS, the incidences of uterine cancer continue to increase by almost 2% per year in women younger than 50 and by 1% per year in older women. During the month of June, IGCS is increasing the awareness and raising resources toward cancer of the uterus. For more insight, I spoke via Skype from Miami, Florida, with Dr. Brian Slomovich. He's a director of gynecologic oncology and chair of the IGCS Uterine Cancer Awareness Month initiative. Take a look.
Now, most cases of cancer of the uterus arise from the inner lining or the endometrium. However, about 4 to 5% actually arise from the muscle, which is called sarcomas. Sarcomas are tumors that arise from the muscle, and they could be very deadly as well. So to answer your question, uterine cancer encompasses everything, but the most common type of uterine cancer is endometrial cancer.
And the data show also that it is on the rise among Black women in particular. How and why?
And that's something that we've been trying to figure out. Now, originally, we thought that the cases in underrepresented populations, particularly Black women, part of it we thought was due to access to care. That's not the case. We're seeing these patients, they're being treated in academic centers, and we're happy about that. What we're learning, however, is that the biology of this disease is different. There are more different types of genetic mutations, which make them more aggressive type of cancers. Therefore, these aggressive type of cancers, what we're learning, increases the deaths due to this disease. Black women are twice as likely to die from endometrial cancer than any other population. So we need to do better. And to do better, we need to do a couple of things. Number one, we need to know what the biological differences are. Number two, we need to determine if our current therapies that we offer are correct across all patients. Because there's a difference in biology, maybe we need to come up with different treatment options to better treat those patients, really regardless of race, but race is one of those factors. Maybe we need different drugs. And three, we need to figure out why, with our current treatment options, are certain populations, including Black women, not responding to therapy as much as we would like. Other reasons in general for the increase in endometrial cancer, obesity, fat tissue, adipose tissue, which we all have, increases the estrogen levels in the body, and it's that increased estrogen which stimulates the lining of the uterus, which causes cancer.
So what are the signs and symptoms to be aware of when it comes to uterine cancer?
When we're talking about the signs and symptoms, we're fortunate. It's not like ovarian cancer, which it presents an advanced stage. For uterine cancer, we often see postmenopausal bleeding in our patients that are postmenopausal. We do see this disease happening in premenopausal women. So then the answer there is abnormal uterine bleeding, heavy periods or bleeding in between periods, pelvic cramping, pelvic pain, pap smears. Pap smears, we know, decrease the incidence of cervical cancer, but they can also identify endometrial cancers. So it's important to do PAPs for a lot of different reasons. Bladder pressure, bladder pain, advanced stage disease, may have abdominal pain, cough. The key is if they have postmenopausal bleeding, don't wait for their annual exam that's going to be in 3 or 4 or 6 months. Go to the doctor sooner. And then the doctor's basically going to say, we need to do a biopsy. Endometrial cancer is a tissue diagnosis. So the biopsies can be done right there in the office with an endometrial biopsy, or they can be done through a procedure called a DNC hysteroscopy. Endometrial biopsies are a blind procedure, basically sticking a straw into the uterus and taking some tissue, or hysteroscopy is done under direct visualization. It's the pathologist that'll then tell us if it's a diagnosis or not. If it's a cancer, then the first step is to talk to the patient, obviously, explain to them that it is very treatable in a lot of women, but it needs to be treated seriously. We then do imaging, and if the imaging's all clear, then we go forward with a hysterectomy. Now, fortunately, we're doing a lot of these minimally invasive with the robotics, so patients are doing much better, getting out of the hospitals the same day, recovering a lot quicker.
IGCS and partners have announced the month of June as the inaugural Uterine Cancer Awareness Month. Why was it important to have an awareness month?
For a couple of reasons. In general, people need to know about this disease. As I mentioned, it is the most common gynecologic cancer. There are, hundreds of thousands of women worldwide who get this cancer. So we need to make it a global initiative to make people more aware. And what's the advantage of that? If it was a disease that we couldn't affect the outcome, then, we want to make people aware. But endometrial cancer is not like that. If we educate people on prevention, decrease weight. If we educate people on the early signs and symptoms, go to your doctor as soon as possible. What we feel, and what I'm certain of, is that we will decrease the number of deaths due to this disease because people are going to become more aware, and they're going to go to their doctor on their first episode of bleeding, not allowing the disease, the nasty disease, to spread. And how are we going to do that? Through education. How do we educate people? Through Awareness Month. Peach is the color of Uterine Cancer Awareness Month. It's a year-wide educational opportunity, research opportunity, but we're committed to June to raising the awareness. We want it to be a sustainable initiative. We want it to happen every year. And the buy-in that we've had, the commitment we've had to groups has really been incredible, and there's a lot of interest there. And we understand there's Breast Cancer Awareness Month, Ovarian Cancer Awareness.